Much, Venerable Sir, much merit to you. Thank you so much to uh, Emeritus Professor Manuri Senanaika for inviting me once again to participate. I'm now going to share my screen. And put up my slideshow, which I hope you will see. In this presentation, I'm going to speak more from my experience as from working with the United Nations Environment Programme for a long time and in many countries, and in my experience more in facilitating and being involved in developing and establishing environmental treaties between nations right across the world. And I see what the Buddha has done and the statecraft of the Buddha in that context. Most of this presentation is based on the Tipitaka, or what is called these days the early Buddhist texts, recorded and preserved first in Sri Lanka. And if you want to know about the authenticity of the early Buddhist texts, please go to the Oxford Centre for Buddhist Studies, where you can download this seminal paper produced by Ajahn Sujato and Ajahn Brahmali on the authenticity of the early Buddhist texts. It is fairly relatively easy using new tools that we have in information technology to authenticate, for instance, the Tripitaka, and authenticate also the existence of the Buddha at that time. But I won't go into that in detail. Perhaps we will do that in the future, or maybe Ajahn Sujato could be asked to do so. Here's what to expect today. In this journey today, we delve into the discourses of the Buddha, as in the Tipitaka. These discourses, not discussed often, that is, about statecraft, offer wisdom that sheds light on how ethical principles can shape effective leadership and governance. We will go into discourses that offer advice on the qualities of an effective leader. We will understand the Buddha's teachings on how to balance between authority, responsibility, compassion, guided by the path of the Buddha Dhamma to liberation, ethics, morality, and governance. We will reflect on how the Buddha Dhamma informs not only about governance, but also about interpersonal relations, community building, and social justice. So let's step back and take a look at what's happening in the world at the moment. Because as Professor Senanaika said at the beginning, there are elections happening in several parts of the world. But I would like to just point out that I am somewhat disappointed with the quality of discourse that is happening in the world today, where the fact of abuse and anger and vilification of opponents have become the new normal. If you look at the Global Peace Index, in 2024, we reached a peak of around 56 active conflicts globally. 92 countries now are involved. Despite lessons from COVID-19, we have yet to have international agreements to prepare for further pandemics. The climate crisis is a serious matter, and I'm afraid action to mitigate the climate crisis is far from wanting. There is also the prevalence of extreme poverty. 700 million people are currently living in extreme poverty, and therefore we need a call to action. We need peacemakers, individuals or groups who will actively engage in conflict resolution, focusing on conditions necessary for long-term peace by addressing the underlying causes of grievances and injustice. So here we are, the statecraft of the Buddha. The interesting thing with the Buddha is that he did not, as some of his peers did, when talking and living the Buddha Dhamma, go into some corner in a cave and exist. The Buddha, you will find, and I will present evidence, was actively involved in discoursing with rulers, with kings, with aristocrats, with generals, with different segments of society about the importance of ethics in governance. And in order to go into this, I would like to draw your attention to this really interesting discourse of the Buddha on willful ignorance. In a world that is rife with misinformation and deliberate deception propagated by often various parts of the social media, the pursuit of knowledge and awareness now becomes even more critical than ever. Willful ignorance, as a result of personal biases, serves to perpetuate anxiety and stress and obstruct meaningful progress. In the teachings of the Buddha, ignorance, avidya, is identified as the fundamental root of suffering and the primary obstacle to enlightenment. In this extremely interesting discourse, ignorance is a condition, Linked Discourses 1236 offers the Buddha's clinical insights into the nature of ignorance and the transformative power of knowledge and awareness. The text states ignorance is a condition for choices, avijjapacchaya sankhara. This highlights the intrinsic link between ignorance and the perpetuation of suffering. And the Buddha was clear about ignorance. Ignorance precedes the attainment of unskillful qualities, with lack of conscience and prudence following along. For the purposes of sources, I have given you the exact Pali texts alongside the English translations, because what my purpose here is to present to you what the Buddha said and did, and that is what I'm interested in. I'm not interested too much in commentary, but rather linking these texts to the present world context. And so in this sutta, there are the following statements. Ignorance, mendicants, precedes the attainment of unskillful qualities with a lack of conscience and lack of prudence. And the Buddha is tough on this matter. He says, an ignorant person sunk in ignorance gives rise to wrong view. At the same time, the Buddha talks about the path of knowledge, awareness, and the means to cultivate skillful qualities and achieve enlightenment. And he says, knowledge precedes the attainment of skillful qualities with conscience and prudence following along. A sage, firm in knowledge, gives rise to right view. I would humbly put forward that these particular statements need to be discussed in schools, colleges, and elsewhere, not in the religious affairs or religion subject lessons, but I think these ought to be discussed in the science lessons, at the beginning of science lessons. When ignorance fades away and ceases entirely, the tangled web of disease, delusion, described metaphorically by the Buddha as twists, ducks, and dodges, also ceases. Listen to this. When ignorance fades away and ceases with nothing left over, then any twists, ducks, and dodges are given up. You can't have a more precise statement than this. So, we move now to the specific teachings of the Buddha on statecraft. Let's start with this sutta on righteous governance. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the numbered discourses 470, entitled Unprincipled Adhammika Sutta, the Buddha says quite precisely, one who is acknowledged as the chief, this could be a president, an aspiring president, a prime minister, or leaders of a nation, if he conducts himself righteously, even before the other people follow. Pajeva itara paja, even before the other people follow. The whole country will dwell in happiness if the king is righteous. So let's pay special attention to this phrase, Pajeva itara paja, even before the other people follow. This verse emphasizes the impact of a leader's conduct, of the conduct of a president, a prime minister, or cabinet members on the well-being of an entire nation. When a leader, especially a ruler, adheres to the principles of Dhamma, justice and righteousness follows. It sets a precedent for others to follow. The influence of such conduct extends beyond mere governance, in my view. It cultivates an environment where peace and happiness ensues. So a righteous leader acts as a pathbreaker, fostering a culture of integrity and harmony. The leader's example inspires others to align their actions with these values, leading to collective prosperity and contentment. You don't need to get a democracy playbook from somewhere else. You have all the playbooks that you need in the Tripitaka if you want to discuss and have a discourse on democracy and good governance. The Buddha also talked about assemblies, people's assemblies, sannipata. Let's go into what he discussed about assemblies. So when you look carefully and closely, you find references to the democratic traditions in society. This is quite extraordinary. In the Anguttara, the Buddha himself lists 16 Mahajanapadas. Look at this. Anga, Magadha, Kasi, Kosala, Vajji, Malla, Cheti, Vacha, Kuru, Panchala, Macha, Surasena, Asaka, Avanti, Gandhara, and Cambodia. He lists 16 Mahajanapadas. Then he talks about also at length about the Sakyan and Kolyan states. These, of course, the Buddha came from the Sakyan Janrajya, People's Assembly, but these were small states that he talked about. But among these republics which he talked about, 4 of them, Vajji, Malla, Kuru, Sakyan, exemplified a non-monarchical form of governance, emphasizing the importance of assemblies and collective leadership. It is my contention that this is one of the reasons why the Buddha was so much at home talking about the whole area of statecraft and good governance, which was one of his themes. Now we move into how the Buddha actively guided leaders in the art of governance. I just want to point out that leaders went to see him because of his presence and because of his expertise and because of the way in which he lived his life. He did not go to see kings and rulers. Rulers went to where he was staying. Such was the presence of the Buddha. Today, where the integrity of governance and democracy is overshadowed by bewildering deceit and misinformation, I believe that the teachings of the Buddha offer hope for the future. Among the teachings of the Buddha is this remarkable discourse which took place at the Saranda, the tree shrine in Vesari, now in Bihar, stands out as a masterclass in leadership and unity. It is disappointing that these discourses are not at the forefront of discussions in the Buddhist world. Let's take a look at this discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya 721, which was delivered to the leaders of the Vajji Confederation, a people's assembly that flourished during the time of the Buddha. Let me take you and give you a background into the Vajji Republic. You will find there in the map, and I have pointed an arrow at it, the location of the Vajji Confederation. This included the famous Lichavi people, whom a lot of mention is found in the Tripitaka. The Vajjis lived around the territory of Vesali. They were organized into a Jnana Sangha, an oligarchic republic. They were a very powerful community. Vesali was the capital of the Vajji Republic. So picture this. The Buddha is residing at the Sarandada tree shrine near Vesali. The tranquil environment served as a sacred space where leaders and lay people alike would gather to seek the counsel of the Buddha. The Buddha used it as a training hub. And on this occasion, many Lichavis, princes and rulers, prominent leaders of the confederation visited the Buddha, and they sat down to hear him give a discourse. And in this remarkable discourse, the Buddha gives his 7 principles of governance. The first of the 7 principles of governance: frequent assemblies and meetings. As long as the Vajjis meet frequently and have many meetings. What is the significance? Frequent assemblies ensure that the community remains engaged in decision making, fostering unity and collective strength. Number 2, the second principle of governance: as long as the Vajjis meet in harmony, depart in harmony, and carry out their duties in harmony. This is an important masterclass for presidential assemblies today in the world. What is the significance? Harmonious interaction during meetings ensure that the decisions are reached collectively and amicably, creating a stable and cooperative governance leading to constructive action. Number 3, respect for ancient traditions. As long as the Vajjis do not enact new laws or abolish existing ones, but live by the ancient Vajjian traditions. Significance: adherence to established traditions provides continuity and stability, ensuring that governance evolves thoughtfully without unnecessary disruption. 4, the fourth principle: respect for elders. As long as the Vajjis honor, respect, esteem, and venerate their elders, considering them worthy of listening to. Significance: respecting the wisdom and experience of elders ensures that leadership benefits from knowledgeable and considered counsel. Then 5, which is a remarkable principle: the protection of women and girls. As long as the Vajjis, listen to this, as long as the Vajjis do not forcibly abduct the women or girls of other families, protecting the rights and dignity of women fosters a just and humane society, contributing to social harmony and stability. Let's take this particular principle in world context. Because human trafficking, as you can see, and this is just one of the suttas where the Buddha talked about the trafficking of women and girls. There are several others. I just like to tell you that these suttas that I am presenting to you today is just an iota of what the Buddha talked about statecraft. And it is difficult within this short period of time to present all that he said. So the United Nations defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, and deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. So, according to the US State Department, there are more than 27 million people trafficked worldwide at any given time. Whilst men and boys are victims as well, most individuals identified as trafficked for both labor and commercial sex are women and girls. According to a 2021 report by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, for every 10 victims detected globally, 5 are adult women and 2 are girls. Look at this principle. The Buddha was never shy, never shied away from speaking truth to those in power. The 6th principle, care for places of worship. As long as the Vajjis honor, respect, esteem, and venerate the Vajrayan shrines, both inner and outer, and do not neglect the proper offerings made in the past. This is where you find the majesty of these teachings when you look into it. Because the Buddha did not say maybe temples or places of worship concerning the Buddha Dhamma, he was including all the different spiritual traditions that were relevant there. So significance, respecting and maintaining cultural and religious sites, reinforcing identity and spiritual well-being, preserving cultural heritage. And 7, provision for spiritual persons. As long as the Vajjis provide protection, shelter, security for the Arhats, ensuring more Arhats might come into their realm and that those there may live in comfort. Supporting spiritual practitioners strengthens the moral and ethical foundations of society, ensuring that the community benefits from their guidance and principles. So, the Buddha talks about pati, growth, and parihani, decline of societies. So, the Buddha concludes his discourse by saying that as long as the leaders adhere to these 7 principles, they can accept growth, not decline. I just want to put it to you that you don't have to wait for the World Bank to come and tell you or tell us or people in the world about growth. Here is evidence that the Buddha talked about growth in all its holistic forms long before these concepts came into vogue in the world. Buddhyeva lichavi vajinang patikancha no parihani. As long as the leaders adhere to the 7 principles, they can accept growth, not decline. And here is a very interesting example of how the Buddha dealt with a warmongering ruler, very relevant for the world today at the moment. So King Ajatasattu of Magadha was the king of a very powerful Mahajanapada in India at the time. And he was in constant conflict with the Vajji Confederacy. Why? Because there was a dispute over the control of trade routes vital for commerce. Then there was an area, a region under conflict was the strategic port to the Ganges River. And this split the Magadhans and the Vajjians. And then also the Vajji Confederacy did not recognize the leadership or the kingship of Ajatasattu as you know, in the Tripitaka, it is stated that Ajatasattu usurped, he killed King Bimbisara and took over the reins of power. And if I may draw your attention, Ajatasattu was also the one who supported Devadatta when Devadatta tried to usurp the leadership of the Sangha. And so Ajatasattu declared to his people, to his ministers, I shall wipe out these Vajjis, so mighty and powerful, I shall destroy them and lay ruin and devastation upon them. This sounds like some current leaders in the world at the present moment today. Not that very different to what went on then. But despite his warlike determination, King Ajatasattu demonstrated an intriguing respect for the Buddha. And before embarking on his military campaign, he instructed his trusted Brahmin minister, Vasakkara, to consult the Buddha, which is quite intriguing and quite interesting. So here is my abstract of Ajatasattu threatening war on the Vajjis. So Vasakkara went to meet the Buddha. And then when Vasakkara went to meet the Buddha, he went in I think chariots. They went in chariots, but at the place where the Buddha was staying, I haven't mentioned all of this, he had to get down because they couldn't travel by chariot, by those forms of transportation, as the Buddha was living in a very remote sort of woodlands in the area. So Vasakkara went to see the Buddha and delivered the message that King Ajatasattu was planning to invade the Vajjis, and what did the Buddha think about this. So the Buddha adopted a very interesting tactic of communication. He did not speak directly to Vasakkara. And this is very clearly stated in this discourse. Venerable Ananda was near the Buddha. The Buddha spoke to Ananda and then he questioned Ananda as to whether he did this one by one, principle by principle, and he asked Ananda whether the Vajjis were practicing the 7 principles of governance. And Ananda replied on the affirmative, saying that the Vajjis were in growth rather than in decline. And then the Buddha said, if the Vajjis were in growth rather than decline, there would be they would not be subject to the possibility of being attacked and being defeated. So then Vasakkara, following this discourse, realized that King Ajatasattu cannot defeat the Vajjis in war unless he engages in bribery or sow dissension amongst the confederacy. So these principles expounded in this discourse bear immense relevance to contemporary governance and international relations. Here is the vision of the Buddha, which we now will move to this ocean of unity, as he called. In several discourses, the Buddha uses the metaphor of 5 great rivers: the Ganga, the Yamuna, the Achiravati, Sarabu, and the Mahi merging into the vast ocean to illustrate his vision of unity of humankind, offering a powerful visual image for environmental interconnectedness. And this is in this remarkable discourse called the Discourse on Observance Day in Udana 5.5. And listen to what he has to say. Furthermore, when they reach the ocean, the great rivers, that is the Ganges, Yamuna, Achiravati, Sarabu, and Mahi, lose their names and clans and are simply considered the ocean. Now, let's do a fact check on this statement of the Buddha. Keep this in mind. I'm going to repeat this again. Furthermore, when they reach the ocean, the great rivers, that is, the Ganges, Yamuna, Achiravati, Sarabu, and Mahi, lose their names and clans and are simply considered the ocean. Now we have information technology. We have AI. So let's see what the Buddha said, whether it checks out or not. Take the Ganges. The Ganges begins its sacred journey in the western Himalayas, within the Indian state of Uttarakhand, traversing approximately 5,525 kilometers through the Gangetic plains in northern India and Bangladesh and tributaries. It merges into the ocean at the Bay of Bengal. Fact check 1. So this is the Hooghly River, which is a tributary of the Ganges. I'm giving you just one of the tributaries that flow into the Bay of Bengal, courtesy of NASA. Let's take the second one, the Yamuna River, courtesy Google Earth. Originates from the Yamunotri glacier in the Garhwal Himalayas in Uttarakhand, converges with the Ganges at Allahabad, Prayagraj, as it is called now. From there it continues its journey to the ocean via the Ganges. Fact 2. Fact 3. Achiravati, now known as the West Rapti or the Rapti River, originates from the lesser Himalayas of Nepal, travels southwards into India, joining the Gagra River, a significant tributary of the Ganges, which flows eventually into the Bay of Bengal and joins the ocean. Fact 4. The Sarabu, also arising in the Himalayas, the Sarayu as it is called now, flows through Nepal and northern India, merges with the Gagra River, contributing its waters to the Ganges and subsequently to the Bay of Bengal. Fact 5. The Great Mahi River originates in the Vindhya range and flows through the states of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Gujarat in western India, emptying into the Arabian Sea, a journey of about 583 kilometers. And here you find, courtesy of NASA, a shot of where it goes into the Gulf of Khambat. This is an extraordinary statement that was made by the Buddha, and you need to realize that this was made some 2,500 years ago. This is the magic of the Tipitaka. This is the magic of the teachings of the Buddha. So here you have the vision and metaphor of unity. The great rivers as individuals, each river with its distinctive name and path can represent individual entities in their journey. They are reflecting the diversity and uniqueness of every person, each within their own experiences and identities. Reaching the ocean symbolizes the state of unity coming together. Emerging from their individual discourses, these rivers merge into a vast ocean, goes beyond names and clans, and humanity needs to today recognize the interconnectedness with nature and work collectively together to tackle these urgent common issues. We move to the significance of Chakravarti, which the Buddha talked about. The Buddha, in several discourses, highlighted the concept of Chakravarti to emphasize that moral governance leads to societal well-being. He also warns that when rulers neglect these responsibilities, social decay follows, leading to poverty, crime, and suffering. And in this discourse, who is the king of a wheel-turning monarch, the Buddha says, it is principle, Dhammo Bhikkhu. Here's the principle, reference to the Dhamma itself, which is the ethical and moral foundation guiding all actions of a ruler. And the Buddha describes a just ruler relying on the Dhamma, providing protection and security to all segments of society. The Buddha talks about such righteous governance cannot be overthrown and undermined by any human enemy. Kenachi manussa bhutena pachatikena panina. This points to the invincible nature of moral authority, rooted in justice and righteousness over mere worldly power. And the Buddha, in this discourse, long discourses 26, and then Chakravarti Sutta 2.1, points out, let not injustice prevail in your realm. Those who are poor in your kingdom, you should provide them with wealth. Those who are poor in your kingdom, you should provide them with wealth. Let not injustice prevail in your realm. I'm going to skip over some of these because we are nearing our time now. But I'd like to point out that this is the embodiment of Dhammic diplomacy. A Dhammic diplomacy which stands out in history as a process through practical, effective, compassionate means, which marks a stark contrast to conquest, crusades, colonial subjugations causing immense suffering in the world today. So let's reflect on these principles. A leadership rooted in values. The Dhamma teaches that the true leadership is not just about power but responsibility, guided by right view and right intentions, the convergence of wisdom and compassion. Applying the Dhamma to modern challenges, a call to action as we stand at the crossroads of challenges in governance. The path of the Dhamma provides us with the way forward. The final reflection, the Dhamma's legacy in governance. As you move forward, remember that governance is not merely a duty. It is an opportunity to serve, an opportunity to uplift, and an opportunity to bring about lasting positive change. In the words of the Buddha, victory breeds hatred. The defeated live in pain. Happily, the peaceful live, giving up victory and defeat. So the journey of governance continues. And the teachings of the Dhamma remind us that our work is never truly complete. As leaders, as practitioners, and as individuals, we continue to strive towards the just and the ethical. And I wish all of those who are here to lead with wisdom, govern with compassion, and walk the path of the Dhamma. I'd like to also point out to you that a lot of what I have said is also in my book, which I have written recently, called How Buddhism Empowers Personal and Social Change. And this is available at the Buddhist Cultural Center in 2 of their centers in Colombo. And the proceeds of the book go to the Bhikkhuni Training Center at Dekanduala near Horana. Thank you so much. Please connect with me on Facebook if you have further information. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don, for an amazing job done. With delving into all those suttas and also presenting the Pali with it. And finally, coming to unity and compassion and wisdom. Thank you very much. Shall we open the floor to discussion? If I may ask, the 5 rivers, it means unity, equality as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Equity.
Equity. Right.
It is quite amazing. When I looked at this particular sutta about the ocean, I was amazed when I checked it out. And I still can't reckon how it is possible. It still beats me as to how is it possible that someone 2,500 years ago should be so pinpointedly be accurate in this statement. And it is so easy now to check out the statements of the Buddha and verify them, like in the way it has been done.
Thank you for taking all that trouble, Google search and so forth. It is an image. We have one on chat from Drew. Thank you. Yes, it is an amazing, I've lost it. Amazing, beautiful presentation.
But I have a question,
Yes.
ma'am.
Mm.
I find it rather concerning that these treasures that we find in the Tipitaka, these teachings of the Buddha on governance, is not at the forefront of discourses concerning the Buddha Dhamma in the Buddhist world today. I find it, I don't find them being discussed. And I'm posing the question to this esteemed audience. I can't understand why.
During our economic crisis, we did hear a fair amount about the Chakravarti Sutta and how it would lead to poverty and then crime and lying and all kinds of things, and finally a Holocaust. And the Kutadanta Sutta and about agricultural policies and hunger, correction of hunger and things like that. Anuja, we have a excellent presentation. I hope you can present this to the leaders of the world plus leaders of Sri Lanka.
That is also your task, ma'am.
Well, it's going to be on our YouTube. You mentioned about helping the, obviously that is something very much in our culture, like dana, feeding the hungry or helping the poor. The mechanism of this as in a process of governance might come into.
Indeed, yes. It is more than dana in the sense of giving that we are talking about. Because when we are talking about dana, often it is dana that is provided to the Sangha in the form of giving. The Buddha's take is actually in many of the suttas is about actually the rulers providing economic support, economic programs. This is how I understand it.
Yeah.
It is helping, creating initiatives to help the disadvantaged.
If I may.
Yes, Bante.
Oh, Anuja, it's okay. I'll say something first. Yes, well, it's a bit of a silly question. That is, where did you get those beautiful illustrations from? Is it artificial intelligence, or did you create some of them yourself, or you picked them out
Yes,
from?
I created these illustrations through using AI. But you need to, I just want to add, Bhante, to add Venerable Olanda, the Tripitaka lends itself to these images because when you read the Tripitaka, it is very descriptive. And you find, yes, when you read the Tripitaka, you can visualize these images in your mind. And when you look at the sentences, and when you read between the lines and you look at the lines itself, and you look at the words like Sarandada tree shrine, and you imagine what the place might have been, it lends itself to these images. So for me,
Mm.
for someone like myself who loves to dabble in this kind of thing, this is for me hidden treasure which I discover every day.
Very good. Maybe we can ask the computer to create these AI images based on the Pali text or its translations. If the computer doesn't know Pali, maybe the English translation. But other question or remark I had, what came to my mind is during these days, especially during the, what you could say, political upheavals in the United States during the Republican and the Democratic conventions, and Trump and his remarks and the followers of his, and then the new wave of things like more social and how do you say um, social, economic, and compassionate kind of activities proposed by a lady called Kamala Harris. Um, that is a whole new kind of wave, I think. And you can recognize some of these principles, which you also find in Buddhism, in her or their particular approach. Maybe they don't get their inspirations from Buddhism as such, but you can recognize these principles. So, but who am I to sort of preach Buddhism to the American president and vice president? But some kind of well, there are movements. I think there are Buddhist monks, for instance, in Toronto, the Bangladeshi monk, who is preaching and teaching meditation to the police people, for instance, in Canada. And there are other people who are able to, put mindfulness also in the governance of the leaders and things like that. So certain signs that things are happening. But
Yes,
the
that
dark forces are still there. Yeah.
yes, that is the worrying element that you find in the the quality of uh, political campaigns in the West now have hit a new low. It's really gone down in the sense that abuse, the really bad language used against the various minority communities, language used against political opponents, the language used against women have reached a new low. I have not seen this so far in the past in my political career. And the language used particularly against women is extremely troubling. But in this situation, I believe that we in the Buddhist world, with our information and what we glean from the Tripitaka, we have a role to play not just in one part of the world, but all over the world in highlighting these issues in our countries where we are, and to also talk about these important issues along with other teachings of the Buddha Dhamma. This is really important. There is a gentleman who has raised his hand.
Mahendra, is it?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I hope I won't offend anybody with my question. It's in relation to what Don said at the beginning of question time about his puzzlement as to why this aspect of the Buddha's teaching is not broadcast more widely and not spoken of a lot. This is something that puzzled me also, because I find, maybe it's my fault, that the focus on many Buddhist talks and teachings, and when I go and listen to people, is too much on the non-existent self, about how you could attain Nibbana, how you could attain enlightenment, how you could do this, how you could do that. So while saying there's no you, there's a lot of emphasis on you, what you could do. I look at it slightly differently. I look at it that I'm a part of a human community, and I almost like have two telescopes. One telescope is looking at how I can change myself. The other one is looking at my place in the community and what I can do to help the community as a whole and not just myself. I just have this feeling that this idea of self-development is emphasized too much in many of the broadcasts I have heard, and we should pay more attention to how your role as a human being in a community and all that Don said at the beginning then will come more into focus. I'm not saying that it should be one or the other, it should be both. We should remember both, and it intrigues me when people talk about their development all the time and at the same time saying, oh, there's no self. So it's a paradox to me. I don't know whether I'm making myself clear, Don.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think that was what I was aiming for. It is not an either or. To me, it is both and. That the Buddha demonstrated through the Buddha Dhamma the tools for transformational change. But then he also added the fact that you have to care for society. And in the Bahujana Hitaya Sutta, he talked about Bahujana Hitaya Loka Anukampa, compassion for the world. Tayo me Puggala, Loka Tayo me Puggala. There are three kinds of people. So there is the Buddha, the Sangha, and the lay people. Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya, for the welfare of Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya, for the welfare and happiness of people, and Loka Anukampaya, for the compassion of the world. That is the vision of the Buddha. That was what he said and did. So it is important, you have rightly pointed out, and you have hit the nail on the head. You have to do all of that. The Buddha's Dhamma is a radical teaching. That's all I can think of. And the way he lived was absolutely radical.
Thank you very much for that, because I think the Buddha has said there are, somewhere else he said there are 4 types of people: those who do for themselves, those who do for others, those who do both for themselves and others, and those who don't. And he applauded the people who did both. Anoja, yes, Anoja.
Just want to say that these principles, 7 principles that you have explained, now in Sri Lanka, when it comes to leadership, what a lot of Buddhists in Sri Lanka are conversant with is the the Dasaraja Dhamma, the 10 qualities of a leader, which the Buddha explained, and that enshrines the principles that you have mentioned. But although that is sort of common knowledge about among Buddhists, unfortunately, it is not practiced in this country, and that is why we had an economic collapse. So, Don, your talk today is very relevant, and I wish that it could be understood by the leaders of this world. But unfortunately, what I see is that power gets into their head, and the arrogance is so vast that they don't think that anybody could offer them advice. Not even the Buddha. I don't think they think even the Buddha can advise them.
I deliberately avoided the Dasavidha Rajadhamma because it is, of course, in the Jataka. And I deliberately focused on the 7 principles of governance because I have not seen it discussed anywhere. And this I find interesting with the 7 principles because he addressed the leaders of the Vajji Confederacy directly. In the Dasavidya Dhamma, the Buddha relates a story of a king who had embodied those 10 principles. But also at the same time, I do feel that those who practice and live the Dhamma also may need to highlight what Mahendra was earlier referring to, that we need to highlight also these aspects in the Buddha Dhamma alongside the personal transformational aspects in the Buddha Dhamma, because they are both together, they are both interrelated. You can't do one without the other. And that is the onus on our part.
Right. There is a question. I have a question of a practical nature, says Anuja Fernando. Even supposing all the citizens of a country, example Sri Lanka, were to practice peace and non-violence under ethical leaders, how can we ensure that other countries would be willing to do the same? Would this not lead to annihilation of this peaceful country? I think Don said that won't happen. Don?
Yes, of course you have now the example. I'm giving you directly an example. You have Costa Rica in Latin America. I'm just giving you an example. Right, yes. Indeed, Emperor Asoka's kingdom, which disappeared, and then all that is the negative. All right. Okay, I get you. Now, let's take Costa Rica. Costa Rica is situated between sort of powerful states in Latin America. What did they do? Some time ago, they said that they were not going to really, about 30 years ago, they were not going to put and focus in boosting the military. They reduced considerably their military spending, and they said, we are going to now put this money into sustainability programs across the nation. And they said, well, if states around north and south are to invade us, let them come and invade us. But we are not going to sacrifice the maintenance of poverty. This is a very clear example. What's happened today? The natural resources of Costa Rica have flourished. The forests have come back. They are at net zero in carbon emissions, and they are experiencing remarkable growth. They have not been overrun and attacked by other countries. I'm just giving you that an example. At the same time, just to point out that by adopting these principles of the teachings of the Buddha Dhamma does not mean that you become a cream puff. In fact, the Buddha was pretty tough when it came to dealing with corruption and with corrupt members of the Sangha. He called for their ejection in several suttas. So, adhering to principles of the Buddha does not necessarily mean that you simply just be quiet when faced with possibly aggression. In fact, you can have a situation where the country is strong so that it resists the possibility of forces of division.
Thank you, Don. We have 2 minutes. Can I ask a question again? Ajasattu was, as you said, a warmongering king, and we know he was, killed his father, and it was a terrible guy. But I understand that at the first council, 3 months after the Parinibbana, he sponsored the entire thing. He organized the place, it was his doing. I mean, he came forward and it was accepted by the Arahatsuva. They were all Arahants who were, looking at the teaching, and it was a very important thing that happened. So even here we see today, in just human nature, obviously, we see huge projects of these so-called good things, especially for a lot of publicity, and I'm sure Ajasattu probably had transformed himself by then, probably. But the other big criminals come forward and do this huge pinkam.
I'm going to answer that question in this way. Thank you for bringing that one up, because King Ajatasattu played a major role before the first council. There was an urgent need to hold the first council, and then Venerable Mahakassapa and Venerable Ananda, when they went to see him, he put up the structure for the first council to be held. So huge credit in his transformation, because he played a role. I'm sure he would have not only put up the structures, but he also provided assistance and support for those 500 or so monks who attended the first council and stayed around for some 6 to 8 months to preserve the teachings of the Buddha. So there is that element there as well in leaders. So you never know what happens to people in that situation.
Thank you.
I always believe that, as the Buddha did with Angulimala, that change and redemption is possible.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We have now come to the end of our time. Thank you very, very much Don, for a really amazing presentation. So very many suttas, some of them we hadn't heard of. We have a Sarananda Pirivena, a very big Pirivena in Anuradhapura. I hope they teach this Sarananda Sutta, which we had never heard of, till I had not heard of, till you brought it up. So with that, shall we end this session? Thanking all of you who joined, but above all, Don, for having, brought up such an important topic. Shall we then end in the usual way by dedicating this all the merits to the devas and the departed? Bhante, is it all right if you, to be nice, if you can chant the stanzas, Bhante? Please.
Akasatta Chibummata Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumodita Tirang Rakkang Tuloka Sasanang Akasatta Chibummata Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumodita Tirang Rakkang Tudesanang Akasatta Chibummata Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumodita Tirang Rakkang Tumang Paranti Ettavata Chamhi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Deva Anumodantu Samba Sampati Siddhya Ettavata Chamhi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Bhuta Anumodantu Samba Sampati Siddhya Ettavata Chamhi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sambe Satta Anumodantu Samba Sampatti Siddhya Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo Idang wo nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. May Bhante have good health and happiness and peace. And the other Bhante who has joined us, Venerable Somana. Thank you, Bhante. It's a privilege to see you here. And Don, of course. Thank you for that wonderful session, Don. May you be well and continue doing all this wonderful work that you are doing. And thank you everyone for having joined and participated. We'll then end this meeting until next Saturday, 4:30, when the topic is Noble Silence. And Nadisha speaks on that day, Nadisha Vijayasinghe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.